If there's one man who can help, if there's one man who can help, it's the man coming in here right now.
Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the Fullmetal Alchemist fan guide for the 2003 series, part of Fullmetal Fridays, which is also part of a podcast called A Podcast Made Full Metal, roughly covering about one episode for the series, which equals to about 1 week for the whole year, plus the movie if we include it, although I tend to release these usually every couple weeks depending on the schedule, in which I discuss a couple episodes in a row to catch up. You can usually expect them on Fridays, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you for joining me. Today we are talking about episodes 32 through 34. We've got Dante of the Deep Forest, Al captured, and Theory of Avarice. So there's a lot of plot-heavy stuff happening. There's some more action for these next couple episodes. The series is really starting to pick up the pace and build things with more stakes. Dante of the Deep Forest, as the title suggests, introduces Dante. There's the whole battle going on about Wrath, trying to kind of get him because he's basically the linchpin, perhaps, of some great power relating to the Philosopher's Stone. And after that kind of resolves, Izumi actually sends the brothers to meet her teacher Dante to teach them some sort of lesson about equivalent exchange, which doesn't really get to happen because really the whole battle begins to occur there as Greed comes to try and capture Al, because it turns out that Greed is interested in seeing how, since Al's soul was transferred to a suit of armor, he's basically immortal, and Greed, based upon his name, is just desiring everything, and immortality would allow him to basically pursue anything that he wanted because he's just somebody that lives purely for those pleasures and will do just about anything to get them. And he's quite a delightful villain. Interesting detail, Lyra, who was from earlier in the series, she was working with Yoki in the mining town, kind of as his muscle. Apparently it was Dante's apprentice now. It's kind of interesting they took this character who was sort of really just kind of a minor background villain and decided to integrate her a little bit more into this. Be interesting to hear the behind the scenes reasoning for that. Like, oh, somebody liked her design, just said, hey, there's this character here. She might be interesting because she, of course, was a young alchemist desiring power. So we get to see a little bit of her here. And in Al Captured, as the title suggests, a lot of times anime series have pretty blatant titles which sort of summarize the plot, though Fullmetal Alchemists are actually a little more restrained than something like Dragon Ball Z's, which will sometimes give you almost like a 2-sentence summary of the whole episode. It's kind of funny. Probably some kind of translation issue. Basically, Marta goes inside Al's armor, and that slows him down so that he's overpowered. They capture him, and they take him over to Greed's hideout, in which Greed kind of lays out his plans and his explanations for what he's doing. Meanwhile, Izumi and Dante are kind of talking and saying, apparently there's some history between them. They have a little bit of a disagreement, which is also kind of kept sort of ambiguous. Dante's basically saying, well, hey, these boys, as long as they're pursuing the Philosopher's Stone, it's only going to lead to bad things for them. Izumi then goes after Al and decides to fight Greed, but can't quite handle it. Sig's with her, trying to help out. And then Ed jumps into the fray and actually helps out as well. Because here, Greed is showing off his homunculi exchange for not having a soul. His power is the ultimate shield, where he basically has this unbreakable skin, and he can transform and reveal his true form, which is this really like dark, ebony, obsidian-looking kind of monster. He looks almost like an ogre with his little fangs. He's just almost got this demonic sort of look, his true form. Kimberly returns, having bringing the military with him. Greed realizes he's been betrayed, he's outnumbered, so he decides to leave, taking Al and his men with him. Ed actually wants to continue, but he and Izumi are actually kept prisoners by the military because there's a lot of guys with guns just pointing them at them. We see that Archer is once again trying to kind of use this information of the circumstance to grow and increase his power. This leads us to Theory of Avarice, which is honestly, I think, kind of one of the high points of the show. When I think back about the show for the 2003 anime, this is kind of one of those pivotal, iconic moments, especially for the plot. And I'll say that Fullmetal Alchemist, in comparison to Brotherhood, I think is definitely less known for the fight scenes and the action choreography and the animation there. And I think that Brotherhood is admittedly has more of that and is probably superior in a lot of ways, which might make it appeal more to the action craving typical shonen battle shows. But Fullmetal Alchemist had its own good fights too, which usually weren't quite as heavy on the action per se, but there was always strategy involved, and I think a lot of characters will in them. Now, Lust and Gluttony actually track down Greed and his crew, and that once again they kind of have a clash. And one great moment actually is that Greed's men actually sacrifice themselves basically and say, hey, to give Greed more time, like, hey, you go, we owe you for us being saved. And there, there really isn't any love lost, in terms of between them and the military. Law actually had a fight with Armstrong as well, which kind of revealed that. And it was interesting in their conversation and their fight that he had served under Armstrong. So these are people who, for whatever reason, they were kind of thrust under the rug, used for experimentation, and they're loyal to Greed. And Greed's almost kind of taken aback by this, and you see this little character thing where he actually does feel bad for his men. He actually has some compassion, and he's like, wow, the fact that they're willing to basically die for me kind of seems to have a slight effect on him, and they don't really spend too much time on it, but it's clear that he's like, like it's almost like kind of a new thing for him, and it clearly bothers him a little bit, but he goes off with Al, and it's pretty much heavily implied that the homunculi kill his friends. They go into the forest, and at that point, Greed actually says, you know what, Marta, you just wait with Al, and if I don't come back, hey, just basically he can go free, you can go do what you want to do. So Greed sort of abandons his plan, says that, basically Al is pretty much free. He's, and it was interesting too, one funny thing about Al is, Al is such a caring, considerate, open-minded person who really is, he is kind of childlike in that sense where he sees the good in people, which I think is always kind of that other balancing act for the conscious, because he does stick with Greed. And when Marta is saying, no, Greed, I'll come with you, and tries to go up, like, Al's like, no, he told you to stay here. Like, he's actually listening to Greed. It's kind of like with Scar before. Like, he kind of almost is willing to give these people, these villains, who do pretty bad things, second chances. I mean, Greed kidnapped him and was probably willing, to threaten his brother's life to get what he wanted. And Al's still willing to give him a chance, maybe because he sees some of these good qualities. I mean, clearly these men are willing to die for him. There's something there. So I like how willing Al is to kind of team up in the circumstance. And it's like, you know what? Greed's bad, but these other people are worse, So it's just a fun little thing about Al is he kind of pivots a lot with the authority figure. He always kind of trusts who they are. If they're some kind of adult figure, even if they're evil, he tries to see something good in everybody. And it's one of the really endearing things about Al as a character that I thought came out in a funny little moment there. Like, oh, we got to listen to Greed. It was kind of funny. But anyway, Greed decides he kind of wants to actually confront his fears, confront his origins, and face down his creator, because he believes that, the remnants of what I have, my bones, are there. And he actually goes into Dante's house and sees Dante has been killed, basically cut in half, which I forgot about. She's like cut in half, and it's a bit of a farther away shot in the panel scene, but it just reminds me of how like really bloody and gory Fullmetal Alchemist could be. Usually briefly, but literally this old woman's been cut in half, and it's like kind of really gory for the few seconds you see it. It's really shocking. And he sees, okay, she's been killed. Lyra's basically, being all creepy and tricks him into going into this big array, this transmutation circle. And he goes in there. It looks like his remains are nearby, so he's weaker than, and it causes him to expel all of these red stones he's consumed, which have made him more powerful, feeding on that life force like homunculi do. And then right at that time, Ed jumps in and accuses him of killing Dante, because that's what he sees. Still thinks that, Al has been kidnapped, and Greed's still the bad guy. And Greed doesn't really deny it, because he's just kind of over it, basically, and decides, hey, what the heck, I'll play the bad guy. Maybe sensing that his life is kind of limited at this point anyway, or maybe just really tired of running. And he has this fight with Ed, which, clearly is one-sided again. He's on the offensive, and then he just kind of was like, you have to try harder. Ed kind of figures out, all right, well, if his skin is based on carbon because he is basically essentially human, made up of the same components as a human, then all he has to do is use his alchemy to just kind of reconfigure it so that it actually makes the atoms kind of weaker, their connection weaker, so it's less dense, and then he can actually break the shield easier, which probably also is kind of helped by the fact that Greed's kind of weaker anyway. But, Greed's kind of almost like saying, all right, well, more than that, as he kind of mentioned before, you've never killed before. If you want to win, if you want to get your brother back, if you want to really succeed at some of the things you want to accomplish, you're going to have to cross your moral line, which is another sort of tough coming of age idea. Another big theme that Fullmetal Alchemist dances around a little bit. And then, sure enough, Ed goes for the killing blow. He morphs his arm into the spear, the sword, the blade, which is kind of one of his primary moves, and impales Greed to the chest. That iconic shot, just kind of the blade in the chest, and they're posed against each other. And then turns out this is actually kind of fatal, which maybe Ed wasn't completely expecting, not realizing how Greed is actually much weaker now than he expected. And so Greed's dying and basically says, well, this is basically what you're going to have to do. He tells them the weakness for the homunculi is if you can get them close enough to the remnants of the things that were used to create them, the bodies of the original person they were supposed to come from, that's what can really weaken them. That's what can kill them. And basically saying, hey, you have to do this. I'm tired of these other homunculi. They've been controlling my life. They've been manipulating things. They're too powerful. They're too evil. They're too much. You have to take them down. So Greed kind of is saying that, for the greater good, it's probably a good thing. Like, he's tired of just that they locked him away for a long period of time. And I guess they killed some people he cared about recently in some small way. And he's just mad at them. And he actually thinks that Ed might have a chance to do it. So maybe for his own personal reasons, but maybe for other reasons, he says, okay, Ed, you have to take these people down. So Greed dies, and Ed has a hard time really accepting it. He's crying. It's this really tragic moment. Al and Marta later part ways because they decide, Greed's not coming back. Then Al and Ed come back together with Ed and Al saying, all right, well, let's try to track down Scar. Let's try to track down the Ishbalans and see what they might add to this mystery that can help us find out maybe some way around the Philosopher's Stone, figure out what's going on here. And taking that lesson of, all right, we know the homunculi's weakness. Is he going to actually move into that action of following through with killing the rest of them? Which is kind of setting up Ed's arc for really confronting the rest of the homunculi throughout the series. Sort of. Whew, a lot of plot there. Okay, so really overall feelings review for this section here. Really just a really solid, good set of episodes. Like I said before, the plot is really hitting on some major points. With the introduction of Dante, things start to really take a turn. We are now fully in what I would call sort of the main plot. Kind of the episodes before this, we're moving along into the mystery. It's going to be more action, more revelations, more big character stuff. Favorite Fullmetal moment? I really liked the conversation between Law and Armstrong. I liked that little bit of, once again, we've got the issues with Ishbal, the previous massacre still haunting a lot of people, and that subtle connection of humanity. And that's one of the things that, once again, I really like about Fullmetal Alchemist, why I think it's a really good show in general, is because even these minor characters that are really only around for a couple episodes, like these homunculi that Greed breaks out, his team, they have character, and I think the dub helps with the performance there. I think there's a good, solid humanity and likability to all of them. And you kind of want more of them. They're not really around that long, but they make an impression, which I just think is really a sign to good character writing and world building and performances. And really, pretty much the whole fight with Ed and Greed is kind of like, I think, one of my favorite moments, and I guess by extension, really one of my favorite episodes. Because whenever I thought back about Fullmetal Alchemist all these years, I would think like that's one of the big iconic moments, really. It's kind of where things start to, things have been getting serious for a while, but I think things start to pick up more of a momentum at this point. And really with some heavy stuff. I also want to talk a little bit more just about Greed specifically, because I did a character analysis on him a while back, and at some point, maybe if people are interested, I might actually go through and try to give each of the homunculi maybe a little bit more of a video focus on them, just from my perspective. I know there's some good videos out there about that already, but I never really looked at all of them individually. I did a video about them that I know people liked, kind of going over them a bit, but I'd like to look at them all in a little bit more detail. And Greed's one of the ones I think I did do one on, and he is definitely a character that's a fan favorite, and it's definitely it's interesting. It's cool to see why, because he is charismatic and he's fun. He's got sort of a really all the homunculi are kind of driven for selfish reasons, and it's interesting how they are driven by selfish reasons, but they all seem kind of loyal to their master one way or the other. Maybe they're just driven by hate of the Elrics, or a love of the power, or there's just kind of they just don't care about human life as much, or they might just kind of be going along out of fear of Dante. But Greed is actually someone who's kind of against the authority of the master and authority against the other homunculi, isn't going along with the plot. He's really living up to his name very much, and he's just kind of going after what he wants for his own reasons. He's a free agent. And I think that might be one reason why he really stands out. And he's another character who, looking back on it for this viewing, I was surprised how little he's really in the show. I mean, in terms of, we get like little glimpses of him, but I think only like maybe these three episodes, like what, one or two more are where he really has much of a feature. He's really doing a lot, but he does a lot with those handful of episodes that he's in. And once again, I think that just is another reason he's another great character. I love the ultimate shield. I think, yeah, he's definitely one of my favorite homunculi, but I feel like I always think of the trio in this series as you got, really envy, lust, and gluttony are kind of the ones that are doing most of the heavy lifting for really the first half of the series. So I feel like Greed is definitely somebody who stands out because of that. He's definitely a lot of fun, and he makes a pretty good impression. So, and really a big turning point for Ed's characters while having to kind of kill someone, and also with that knowledge about the weakness. So these episodes respectively pretty high. I think I'd give them a 9, and a 10. Really good stuff. So yeah, those are those episodes. If there's any tidbits you'd like to mention, anything that I missed or that you think of, please let me know in the comments. Of course, like, share the podcast video thing, help the algorithm spread this around. I'd like this to get more views if possible. So please, let people know, help that. I'd like to try to grow the channel a little bit more, maybe with some bigger videos, but I want to get through this podcast first, which looks like we're doing a pretty good job of. So everybody who has been listening up to this point, really appreciate it. It's been fun so far going through the series, and really we're past the halfway point now, so we're getting there. And it's one of those things where I actually want to watch more episodes because we're kind of getting to a part of the show where I've tried to rewatch before, and I feel like I always kind of dropped off a little bit around this point for a while. So I'm looking forward to kind of rediscovering these things again, because there's going to be some episodes I haven't really watched in a long time. So it's going to be good to get that experience. All right, everybody, thank you for listening. And in the meantime, of course, stay magical.